leaders are discussing action to tackle climate change at the COP27 summit, which is underway in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. The United Nations Climate Summit is crucial as governments worldwide commit to steps to limit global temperature rises. In fact, it was UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres who said that we're headed towards a chronicle of climate chaos, and which is why COP27 must be the place for urgent and credible climate action. Importantly, it is a stage where India is emerging as a responsible global climate power. Amidst this clarion call, I'm speaking now with Sumant Sinha. He is Chairman and CEO of Renew Power as well as President of ASSOCHAM. He is joining me from Sharm El Sheikh in Egypt, where this conference is going on and where he is participating. Sumant, thank you for speaking with us. Now, what have been the highlights so far? We know this is the first time climate financing has been put on the agenda. Is that the big differentiator?
Well, Tamanna, the reality is it's still very early days right now. We just on Wednesday, conversations have really started on Monday. And most of it really has been around government leaders who have been coming here. Because the first 2 days typically are when heads of state come in, they give their big speeches, they lay down what they think are the important issues. But the real work begins to happen only after that. And that's really when we'll start actually seeing what is the give and the take that is possible on some of these areas. So I would say at this point, the stage has only been set. I think a lot of work needs to happen before we actually find out which direction the wind is blowing in. I think there are two issues, however, that are getting more traction as far as conversations are concerned. One, of course, is the issue of finance, which you talked about earlier. But not so much concessional finance. I think it's more around how do we get more blended finance going, because that's one way in which we can crowd in a lot of private sector investments. And everybody recognizes that while the ask was for $100 billion, that ask is now a little bit, or that amount is now a little bit dated, because now we all know that we actually need trillions and trillions of dollars to come into the sector. And so $100 billion, while it's great, of course, is really not going to be anywhere close to being sufficient. So the conversation really is around how to get much larger amounts of financing to come into the sector. So I think that's one big area. And the second area, of course, that the Egyptians are trying to focus the conversation on is how do we convert this into a COP where conversation is really more around implementation rather than only about setting targets. Because, of course, we've had enough targets being set. And while those targets themselves are also not adequate by any means, the reality is that action on the ground is even worse. And so therefore, we need the action on the ground to really start catching up with the targets that are being set. So I think that's how they want to focus the conversation. Now, what that results in actually in terms of commitments on action steps and so on, that remains to be seen.
I want to put this into perspective of what is actually happening in the world, even as all of you are discussing how to improve climate change in Sharm El Sheikh. We've seen 1 year of the Russia-Ukraine war. Countries are going back to fossil fuels. In fact, India is backing coal aggressively. Is the reality very different from what you are discussing there in Egypt?
You are probably very right, Tamanna. The only I think silver lining on that is that issues around the war are now baked into people's heads a little bit. The initial knee-jerk reaction is now behind, where people were just scrambling somehow to get energy. So that at least is now leading to a little bit more cooler conversations, even with the Europeans, where they're also now thinking a little bit more about the longer term, because everybody knows that the war is a very uncertain thing. It can carry on for a long time, or it can come to an end tomorrow. Nobody really knows. But the reality is there are a lot of geopolitical uncertainties. Today with Russia, tomorrow with who knows which other countries there might be. Supply chains have to become more focused on energy security than they have been so far in the past. But all of that is now in people's consciousness. And now they're really thinking about how to look beyond this. And because this is, of course, a conversation area which is really focused around climate change, therefore people are focusing a little bit more on what needs to be done, given all of these uncertainties that you mentioned already. I think there is also recognition that clearly we are falling further behind. And so this is a chance for all of us to get together, not for us per se, but obviously the world to get together, but and really try to, sort of recoup the losses that have been incurred in this battle over the last several months. And so I think that's really going to be the focus of some of the conversations this year.
I have to ask, all of you are there in Sharm El Sheikh. While we can't fix things back home, we've seen and continue to see unbreathable air in the national capital of Delhi. And it's a problem going on since a decade that we haven't been able to find a solution to internally. Don't you think that's a little ironical?
Yeah, actually, to be very honest with you, Tamanna, some of the biggest issues on dealing with climate change issues really are micro and local issues. Because, for example, one of the big reasons why the world is not adding renewable capacity addition fast enough is because of local permitting requirements. And so, while at a macro level, everybody recognizes that we need more renewable energy capacity, when it comes to putting up a wind farm or a solar farm in somebody's neighborhood, or to part with land for that, everybody starts having a different point of view. So I think these are realities of life that one has to overcome. Now, of course, India's pollution problem is very intractable, and I agree with you. I wish we could solve it faster, but it is not getting done, and that's it's a real shame. And you don't even know why we start having these conversations only at this time of the year, when the pollution comes and actually hits us on the head, rather than at all other points in time of the year. So I think as citizens, we also have a duty that we also just drop the ball when the skies clear up as well. Articles aren't written about it. The courts don't do anything about it. Governments don't do anything about it, and we all tend to sort of go into blissful unawareness and ignorance until it comes and hits us again on the head. So I think we need to provide much more sustained sort of work around the year to try to solve this problem.
During the summit, there was a UN report on greenwashing, which is essentially companies saying that they're going in for net zero emissions, but not really doing much. And you have so many large corporate houses saying that they will go net zero. How do we ensure that this is not just greenwashing? I mean, it's not just a PR stunt, but actual work is being done.
No, that's a great question, Tamanna, because see, what's happening is that while of course governments are moving forward on setting targets and taking actions and steps, and that's incredibly important, of course, because government mandates have to drive a lot of the change. The reality is that corporates have to join the party as well, and it's very critical for corporates wherever they are in the world to also start going down their own decarbonization paths. But unlike for governments, where we have this massive forum called COP, where everybody gets together and these conversations have been happening for the last 20 years, there is no equivalent forum for the corporate sector. And corporate sector, accounts for almost, I don't know the exact number, but I would assume that a large majority of the emissions. And so what companies end up doing themselves is very critical. And you're absolutely right that right now there is a lot of posturing, there's a lot of announcements that are happening, but frankly, there is no UNFCCC type of agency that is monitoring any of that. And therefore, anybody can say anything and get away with it, frankly speaking. And that's not a great state of affairs. And that is why I think at this COP, the UN is now trying to launch a validation, a standard setting body, a validation body for the corporate sector. And I think that was just announced yesterday. I think that's a very important step forward. Otherwise, you have corporates making all sorts of claims and commitments, and there's no way to verify them. There is no standardization in any of that, in any of those claims. And that's not a good state of affairs when, in fact, such a large amount of emissions are sitting with the corporate sector.
That's an important point. Thank you so much, Sumant, for speaking with us. Sumant Sinha from Sharm El Sheikh, telling us all the latest from the COP27.
Start your trading day with non-stop updates. and uninterrupted trading ideas to power up your portfolio with unmatched experience and analysis from our market experts.
In the market, right here in 80 now with
start trying to make us some pipe. It's a smart start.
10 is up more than 400 points.
Management is now with us. Overvaluation case.
See that 17K.
Watch the opening show from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. 89. Break free.
Attic Fittings make your furniture work beautifully. German quality you can trust.